And we're live. Welcome everybody to another edition of Deconversion Stories. Today I'm talking with Seek to Reason. I think we spoke about this a little bit before, where you've been out of the faith for quite some time. But basically, what I want to hear is sort of, the first moments that you can recall about when you started questioning things and things didn't make sense to you anymore, and leading you to whatever level of atheist activist that you are today.
Right. Good. So,
yeah, carry on.
just start with just right into my story then.
Yeah, go right into it. Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So I was raised in a Christian home. I was actually brought up in a mega church, probably about 4,000 or 5,000 seat mega church.
Wow.
And so I was brought up in that, and by the time I got to age 14, I had really made a kind of a born again decision, a dedicating my life to Christ decision, and at that time, and really throughout my childhood too, music was a real big voice in my life, and you could imagine that a church like that had just state of the art everything for music and media. Mm-hmm. And so just the way my nature was, that was a big draw right there. And so that kind of had
Did you get involved with it there? Like, were you a member of the... Okay.
Right shortly after, kind of getting really involved in the youth group when I was 14, and kind of becoming like a zealot really for as a Christian. I just jumped right into the music program there, and learned to play guitar and sang with the youth group bands and all that kind of stuff. And that was kind of a pretty big motivating factor in how enthusiastic I was with my faith at that point. And it pretty quickly kind of put me in a place where all of my friendships that I've chose to value were the ones that I had at church, and I kind of shut it, in a lot of ways, kind of shut out a lot of the friends that I had at my school and in my community. Kind of a real dick move too at the time, and I didn't really see it, but
were these friends that you've had since childhood before that, or
some of them from elementary school. Most of these friends that I kind of shut out were kind of my middle school friends that I started running with just prior to really having that conversion of faith. Like I said, I was raised as a Christian, so I kind of always believed, but there was that choice to really dedicate myself. I went to a this youth group. They used to do these big retreats every summer, and it kind of like really kind of like the Jesus camp thing, if you've ever seen that, or if you're familiar with the Jesus camp. Okay. And a little bit older of an age bracket than what you see in Jesus camp. We're talking middle school and high school age kids, but the whole parade of nonsense with the speaking in tongues and all the crazy stuff that you can find in the evangelical churches. And
did you ever do that? Did you ever do the speaking in tongues thing yourself?
Yes, I sure did.
And you didn't realize at that point that it was ridiculous? Or did you actually think you were saying something?
Well, it's interesting because I guess I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I feel like you recognize that it's ridiculous, but you got to kind of shut the reasoning part of your brain off and just buy into what you're being told.
Right.
And it seemed like there was a lot of coaxing
Sure.
to try to get people to do it, and to do it in a way that they felt was sincere. It seemed like they played a lot of games with people, encouraging them to do it, but then also trying to make sure people weren't being insincere about it. And you got these kids, they don't know the difference between that kind of thing. So a lot of confusion, it seemed like but no, I bought into that, and I held on to that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So through my teenage years, I became a real Bible thumper, even in school. And that kind of became my reputation throughout high school. And I alienated a lot of people doing that. Toward the end of my high school year, I kind of calmed down a little bit and kind of had more of a diplomatic approach to what I was trying to do, for God. And
You tried to convert people while you were there, or what?
yeah, I felt like it was my responsibility to save the world, right.
Yeah.
They, it was pretty well drilled into us that, all your friends that don't know Jesus are going to go to hell. They're going to be tortured and burned forever. And,
Right.
at that time I didn't see how, ridiculous, that notion is, and how contradictory it is to the idea of a benevolent God.
Sure.
At that age, I just thought, I was scared and concerned for my friends, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to them. So, I constantly had this need to try to save them, try to save the world. So,
Did you slip many chick tracks or anything like that, or little chick track comics? Here, check this out.
yeah, yeah. Our church wasn't really big into those. They wanted you to to talk to people, and which
Sure.
scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. And so I very rarely, I never was one of those types that would go out on the street, and I was comfortable with talking to my friends about it. But I, except when I was, behind my guitar and behind a microphone, then I was very comfortable to speak in front of people. But
Well, you were a singer too, weren't you? You were saying before, played guitar and sung in the bands.
yeah, absolutely. And
But you weren't nervous doing that?
no, it's weird, Yeah, if like I'm sitting here talking to you, and it kind of makes me nervous. If I had to talk to if I had to talk to a room full of people, I'd probably die. But if I had put to sing and play music in front of a room full of people, that's not a problem. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the psychology of the brain, I guess. It's something weird there, but so I graduated from high school, and I got married just a couple years later. I got married really young, and I met my wife at church, and we had a friend from that mega church that we went to, who became a youth pastor at a church nearby. It was kind of like a daughter church to this big church, if you know what I mean. It was kind of like a
affiliated kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of affiliated. So we decided to go to this smaller church with them. And I kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I ended up becoming the worship leader at that church. And so this really felt like an answer to prayer, I guess, or what I thought God was calling me to do. As a believer, I felt like he wanted me to be a music minister. I had gone to a little bit of a, wasn't really a Bible college, but it was kind of like a Bible school at that church to try to prepare myself for being in the ministry. And so we were at that church for a few years, and then there was a church split. The pastor of that church, for some doctrinal reasons and for some reasons kind of his own independence or whatever he thought he wanted to do.
Quick question.
Yeah, no problem.
Somebody in the chat kind of wanted to know, as you were talking about your mega church, what kind of church was it? Like a Reformed, a Baptist, non-denominational?
Oh yeah, sure. We were Assemblies of God.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Assemblies of God?
Actually, I've never heard of that, to be honest.
Really? No kidding. So
yeah.
it's a pretty huge denomination, actually. It's
does it fall under one of the standard categories, or?
It's Protestant. It's evangelical. Okay. It's evangelical. It's kind of like a.
I should have guessed that with the speaking in tongues part.
yeah, for sure. So it's what they would call a spirit-filled church or whatever.
Right, okay.
It's kind of like, gosh, I never really went to a lot of different churches, so it's kind of hard to compare it to anything.
Right. That's fine.
We get the idea it's
Protestant.
Right. But I mean, if you were to like Google Assemblies of God, it's a pretty big denomination. In fact, I think it's probably one of the biggest Protestant denominations in the U.S.
Okay.
So
it's weird that I've never heard it called that before.
Yeah. I could tell you the whole backstory how I got started, but that's not important. But anyways, so we had this church split, and we decided to go with this pastor and break away from this affiliation with this megachurch. And so my family and my wife's family and a lot of our whole mess of our friends, they were all still attending this mega church, and they obviously heard about this split, and it was a big ordeal. And my parents were concerned that we were following false teachings, and we were,
Whoa, really?
Yeah, we were going to be, falling away or whatever. I mean, the idea of leaving this church, and in fact, my whole upbringing and my youth, my time of youth in that church, it was always implied that, you shouldn't leave this church, this group of people. And they didn't come right out and discourage kids from going to college, but it was honestly implied that unless you could figure out how to do something in this local area, then you should, whatever you do, you don't leave this group of people. And so when we were a part of this church split, it was a really big mess in my family. And I never really had a relationship with my dad where we would talk about things. And it was the first time in my life that he took me for a drive. Now, keep in mind, I'm like 21, married. I live in my own house and everything. But my dad takes me for a drive and wants to talk to me about how this is a bad decision, and so that was a really interesting kind of ordeal. And in hindsight, I think it actually set the stage for my deconversion later down the road.
Really? How so?
Well, because up until that point, you didn't question what the pastor said.
Right.
Not like you were told, don't question what the pastor said, but there's just all these implications that, the Bible is true, and what comes out of this pulpit is true, and And if they say that this is right and this is wrong, then that's just the way it is.
Right.
And to be involved in a church split kind of loosened that first link in the chain of being able to think for yourself.
Mm.
And so we were there for probably about 5 years. And there was and after all that mess, there was actually a change in a pastor after that. And but the whole time through, I was doing the music ministry, or what we always called it, a worship leader. And then I'm actually looking at a timeline. I actually tried to figure out my story here when I knew I was going to come on with you, because I hadn't given much thought to the process of how I got where I was until I talked with you on Twitter. But
yeah, that's okay, man. Take your time.
Okay, so then now I'm about 26, and we get
so this
a
would
new
be about 5 years into your new church, right?
Yep, this will be about 5 years into our new church, and it really it was kind of a struggle for a long time. We had bounced around place to place. We were kind of like one of these. You saw a lot of these strip mall churches got real popular. These kind of independent churches that you see. Yeah, that was kind of us. We were kind of bouncing around, renting different facilities and trying to make it happen.
It's a big difference from a mega church with 4,000 to 5,000 seats.
For sure. So we get this new pastor, and he's going to actually be the second major event that loosens that chain of reason that I mentioned before. So with this new pastor for about, maybe 6 to 8 years, we kind of went into this new territory that I had never been familiar with, but some of your listeners and you might be familiar with, because it's gotten popular. It's this message of this Christian message of grace, where they're trying to not stress the sin and the law as much, but teaching more about that God's about grace and acceptance and all this kind of thing. And
acceptance, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is funny. But, and I'll get a little bit more into this with how this group of people went. And so oddly enough, this pastor was the first mentor in my faith that actually encouraged me to read something other than the Bible. I had been talking to him. I had some questions about certain doctrines and things I was curious about, and I was expecting him to give me an answer, just a straight out, this is the correct answer. And instead he was like, just, why don't you do some research and get some books and see what people say about it. And so I picked up this book. Have you ever heard of a guy named Rob Bell?
No.
Okay. He's kind of gotten big. He's a little bit loopy, but for a while I was riding on his wave. He's even been with Oprah a few times. He's kind of a new age Christian preacher these days.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, he wrote this book called Velvet Elvis, and it was
that
about.
Sounds familiar. So maybe I have heard of this guy, but It's just not ringing a bell.
Right. So this book, Velvet Elvis, was about basically about having the freedom and the courage to test why you believe what you believe. And this is a Christian author, and I really took to the book, and I really took to the idea. And during this time, in hindsight, I think even this pastor had his own doubts. We became pretty close as friends, and he had given me a book that was written in the 1800s by a guy with the last name Baldwin. He was a Christian philosopher, and he kind of gave this to me kind of under the table, like, don't let anybody else know that I gave you this. And the title of the book was called The Origins and History of the Doctrine of Endless Punishment. Big title.
Wow.
So I'll say it again. The Origins and History of the Doctrine of Endless Punishment. And what it was, this 19th century Christian philosopher was writing a book about how the idea of hell isn't a Christian idea, or it shouldn't be a Christian idea. Now, since I've become an atheist, I've realized that a lot of these things from Rob Bell and from this old writer were cherry picking things.
Sure.
That there's plenty of stuff in the Bible that is very condemning and horrific.
Oh yeah.
But what it did for me was it made me start to think about whether I believed everything that I always thought that I believed. And so,
well, had you ever read the Bible from cover to cover?
From cover to cover, maybe not. Probably close. I probably, skipped out on a lot of the begats.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But the New Testament for sure, probably several times, and most of the Old Testament, especially Psalms, Proverbs, and the Book of Daniel and Ezekiel, and all the books of the prophets,
Leviticus and Numbers, and
right. Well, you know what? I know that I had read through Leviticus, but it's amazing how, and Exodus, it's amazing how you miss the things about selling your daughter into slavery and how to beat your slave, and all these just absolutely absurd things. Just when you've got your God glasses on, it seems like you just ignore those things, and I guess I was always taught at a young age that if something seemed fishy or odd, it was just because you didn't understand it. You didn't have a revelation to understand it.
That's how they get you.
Yeah. So when I would read something like that, I would just kind of go, huh, oh, I must not get what it really means. So with this pastor friend, I'd kind of become just started to become a bit of a bookworm, which I'd never been in my life other than school assignments and then, reading the Bible when I felt like I really needed to. And so I read another book by that Rob Bell guy. This one's called Love Wins. And again, it was about...
It's a much shorter title.
Yeah, much shorter title. And then you ever heard of Carlton Pearson?
Yes, that name I've heard.
Really, really popular preacher, I guess, in the 90s. And then he lost his tenure and position as a pastor because he kind of came out with a universalist idea of Christianity. Not that he invented universalism, but the idea that everybody's saved. And so I read one of his books, and by this point, in my own mind, I had kind of brought myself to a place where I felt like I was probably a universalist. I just couldn't see that a benevolent God would send anyone to hell unless it was medicinal for, a period of time or something, but only to
whip them into shape or something, or
whip them
teach
into
them a lesson,
shape, or I'm losing the word. It's on the tip of my tongue, but I don't know.
like a
I guess
punishment, or
fix them in a way. I
like
don't know that.
rehabilitation.
Yeah, maybe like rehabilitation or something like that. It just didn't make sense to me that for the short amount of time that you're on Earth, that you could potentially end up in a place of torment for eternity. The
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
eternal punishment for finite crimes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so my way of dealing
That's
with
not
that,
justice.
that's what?
That's not justice.
No, it's not justice. No, it's not. It's absurd. It's disgusting, really.
Yes, it is.
And so at that time, my way of dealing with this problem was to cherry pick. And at the time I didn't think I was cherry picking. I was finding the verses, with the help of these books that I was reading. I was finding these verses that seemed to support the idea that when Jesus came, he saved everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured the verses that didn't support it, again, was because I didn't understand the underlying meaning or something. So that's kind of how I justified the cherry picking. One of the big ones was and I should have wrote it down. I can't remember now. It's been a while since I've cracked open a Bible, but in the New Testament, there's a part where it talks about as Adam sinned and all of creation fell.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was the second Adam, and he restores all of creation. So when I was doing a lot of these universalist studies, and there's actually some people that I ended up kind of creating a little community with. We used to love to find the word all, A-L-L, in the New Testament, because it always seemed to justify this idea that, if Adam did something and it affected everybody, then Jesus did something and it affected everybody. And so that was one of our big points of this idea that the whole earth is saved. And so I started to feel really comfortable in my faith at that point, because that whole idea of being scared for people that I knew that I thought were going to go to hell, now it didn't seem so bad, because I thought that even if they didn't believe, they would still be saved. Mm. And so our church, several of the people didn't know that a few of us were kind of on that extreme level, but even the other people in the church were still really on board with this grace idea. And so we were really running with the idea. And then, for lack of a better explanation, the pastor and a lot of the leadership just kind of ran out of gas. And we had this.
Were people not showing up anymore? Or?
No, we were always kind of a small gig, especially compared to coming from that mega church. And actually, at this point, because of it's kind of funny, but because of some of the youth in our church, we're very close friends with a lot of the youth at that mega church, and there was a lot of talent in our little church musically. A lot of the youth would go back and forth from that mega church and ours, and it kind of mended that bridge that had been broken years ago. Not to the point where there was any kind of endorsement or anything, but I actually ended up going back and performing a few times at that mega church. which at the time seemed really cool because I had been doing all of my performing on a pretty small stage. And then I got on this, mega state-of-the-art stage with lights and everything that you could think of. But anyways, so, it had mostly to do with the pastor. He had been doing it for several years, and he was just kind of done. And none of us, it's kind of odd, but none of us really felt like trying to keep it going. And almost not a single person had any desire to go to a different church. It's like we had separated ourselves so much from that rigid evangelical doctrine where we all came from, that once we decided to disband, I guess, or hang it up, almost none of the people that I know of, and I've lost contact with a lot of them, didn't have it in us to go to another church because we knew what we would be going back into.
Right.
And I do know of a few people that attend other places, but so after that, for me personally, and my wife, my family, when we decided that we didn't really want to go anywhere, we just kind of floated in place. And for the first time in our lives, we didn't go to church. Wow. And I still had a faith. I still believed. I had a group of friends that we kind of had like a little bit of a Bible study every now and then, and that didn't last. And so just kind of wandered, I guess, kind of aimlessly. And during this time, just in my, entertainment with the music that I like to listen to, and actually I started getting involved in more non-church music, because right around this time I actually joined a metal band with a friend that I worked with.
Nice.
And yeah, and I'm still doing that. It's been going great.
Sweet.
But so I never really, when I was a teenager, I kind of shut down all of the secular stuff. I wouldn't listen to secular music. I wouldn't watch rated R movies and all that kind of stuff because that was really preached at us. But in this later time, I had loosened up a little bit and started enjoying all the music that I missed out on, or that I had a brief little rebellion at 13 before I got saved, and had fallen in love with like Pearl Jam at that point, and Stone Temple Pilots and Alice in Chains. And so during this time, I kind of started going back to some of these older things that could have been, influences in my younger life, the way I see that it should have been maybe, but started listening to Bad Religion. You ever heard that band?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And so with bands like that,
I worked in a record store, so there's not too many bands I haven't heard of.
Oh, right on. Cool. So bands like Bad Religion, and then also some comedy, like Ricky Gervais and George Carlin and Bill Burr.
All the atheist comedians.
Yeah, you see. So, and this is kind of like, I just started getting onto Facebook around this time. I'm about 34 years old at this time. And so I'm in this kind of wandering, not really questioning my faith really, but just kind of dormant in a way. And I'm hearing these atheist comedians, and they make these jokes and they kind of rub me the wrong way, but I'm laughing because there's like this spark of reasoning there, when the reason why comedians are funny is because what they say is true. And and I'm trying to swallow some of the stuff that they're saying, and but mostly just laughing it off. And but this kind of stuff keeps popping up. And one day on Facebook, I see this short little video of Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he's talking to Larry King or something. And
I think I know the clip you're referring to.
yeah, he asks him about, you know, how he feels about not living forever or not having an afterlife. And Neil's answer just probably for the first time, it kind of spun me sideways, because he didn't answer it with, like somebody who's worried about it.
Right.
He answered it with just sound logic and reasoning and
what actually happens.
right, exactly. And so it was probably the first time that I actually even considered the idea that maybe there isn't anything. And I just hop back a couple years before that, I had an opportunity to get a degree at a community college. I'd never gone to college before, and so it was doing it later in life. And in an art history class, I had a professor just in normal teaching without skipping a beat say that Moses was a fictional character. And up until that point, I'd never even considered that any of the characters in the Bible weren't actually people. It never even dawned on me to question that.
Lots of them were characters.
Exactly. Most of them are fictional characters. So things like that incident there with that professor, but then with this, with Neil Tyson, it really started to make me think. And so I had gotten on YouTube and searched out that clip to watch it again. Mm-hmm. And you know how when you're on YouTube and you watch something, it'll suggest something else that you might be interested in below.
Usually along the lines of what you just watched too.
Yes, exactly. So I watched this clip of Neil Tyson again, and below that is a thing called The Great Debate. And it's got Neil Tyson, and then it's got Richard Dawkins, who I'd never heard of until at that point, and Lawrence Krauss, and Bill Nye, who I was familiar with. Anyways, it's got this panel of people. And I watched that, and it wasn't really a debate. They were just kind of having this big discussion. But there were a few times through the debate where they made some comments about faith and about religion, and it piqued my curiosity even more. And so
I've seen that video you're referring to too. They're all up on stage in their little easy chairs.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've actually watched it probably 10 times. It's really great. But from that brought Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss into my orbit. And so I started watching YouTube debates with Richard Dawkins and apologists. Funny thing, my whole life growing up in the church, nobody ever talked about an apologist. And I got to think that the reason why they might not have done that is because if you're watching an apologist, you're going to be hearing the other side of the story as well. And I feel like that the church that I grew up in, they didn't want you to hear any other narrative at all. So, I was never familiar with William Lane Craig or Dinesh D'Souza or Larkin, Terry, what's his name? The one that was a friend of Christopher Hitchens. Taunton. I never knew any of those apologist names, when I was a Christian. I only knew it after I became, I wasn't even an atheist yet. But
would you consider yourself starting to be on the fence at that point?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So what was happening was I was watching Richard Dawkins and then Lawrence Krauss, and then one of the videos that popped up was a Christopher Hitchens. And
Oh,
yeah, and when I started watching Hitchens just destroy these apologists, and every time I thought I might have a question that, you know, would bring me back, you know, to faith or whatever, I would hear one of these apologists say something similar, and then I would watch Hitchens just demolish it. And I don't know what month or day it was, but it was sometime around when I was probably 37, 38. This is just a couple years ago.
giving away your age, man.
I was at work, and so my job affords me the opportunity to watch YouTube videos all day long while I'm working. It's the only thing good about my job. But one of those days, I kind of stopped, and I thought to myself, "Holy crap! I think I might be an atheist." And I had one friend at work.
Epiphany.
Yeah, the atheist epiphany. I had one friend at work, and he's
someone
still there.
said in the someone just said in the chat, you got hitch slapped.
I did, for sure. And you know, he passed away in 2011, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
I never even knew who Christopher Hitchens was while he was alive. You know, I only came on to the videos of him years after he had passed away. And
right.
so it's funny. It's like I feel like I miss him, but I never even got to enjoy him while he was alive. But anyways, so I had one friend at work, still a good buddy of mine at work, who was the only person that I felt comfortable talking to about this. And he actually had known. I told him a little bit before, weeks and months before, about some questions that I had, and I've been watching these philosophers and scientists on YouTube and stuff, and I just told him one day, I said, "Dude, I think I'm an atheist," and he wanted to know, you know, if
you try to exercise it.
he's one of those people who's not really anything. Never really bought into any religion, but never really felt the need to denounce it either, so to speak, I guess. We've had a lot of conversations since then, and he mostly agrees with my points of view. But,
does he consider himself an atheist? Because if he doesn't believe in any deities, that's pretty much what he is.
Yeah, I think he probably does. But I think for him, it's just not even a thing to think about. Which it kind of makes sense, I guess. If it was never a thing on the other side for you, then I can understand it. You know, not being a thing for you on the atheist side.
Grew up secular, I suppose.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Since then, there's been a few other people at work that I work at a pretty big place. There's a lot of people, and I've met a few people and have found out that they're atheist, or they might identify as agnostic, not really understanding the definitions like a lot of people do.
Well, people use different definitions.
Right.
Some people use the philosophical, some people use the colloquial. You know, it just depends on where you sit.
Yeah. So there's only up until today, there's only a handful of people, not counting the community that I've found on Twitter. But in real life, the people that I see and encounter, there's only a handful of people that know I'm an atheist, and that, you know, I could feel comfortable talking with about it. My my mother and father would just be crushed if they were to find out. Sometimes I feel like a bit of a coward because I see
You haven't told them?
No.
Oh, so none of your family actually knows this, I guess, eh?
No, and in fact, I mean, this might be damning of myself, but even my own wife probably isn't 100% certain. I think she speculates it, but she doesn't have a real strong belief since we've never been back to church, and she has no desire to go. But I think that...
Have you talked to her about it?
No, we've never actually. I've never talked to her about it.
Things are okay between you guys, though, right?
Yeah, and but to be honest with you, it makes me uncomfortable to tell you this, or to tell anybody that, you know, I haven't had that conversation with my wife, and we have 4 kids, and it's been very important to me the last couple of years to try to protect them from any possible chance of them going through what I went through, where they get kind of
like deeply indoctrinated, sort of thing.
Yeah, and they get enticed into, you know, some youth, really flamboyant youth ministry, and then they get heavily indoctrinated like I did. And so I've been kind of very proactive with making sure that doesn't happen. Oftentimes my mother mostly will ask us to come to church with them on some, you know, Easter Sunday or something like that. And
do you go?
No. And honestly, if it was just me, I would go. But I don't want to take my kids there because I'm just afraid that they'll get vulnerable. Say again, sorry.
Kids are vulnerable and could easily be swayed into something like that, especially if it's coming from people that they understand, they can trust, you know?
Right. And my parents, they go to this mega church that I was raised in. They still go there. And I know what it's like there. And any kid or any teenager is could be very easily enticed there, because they don't blink at spending the money to have the coolest, you know, most state-of-the-art entertainment for these kids there, and it's...
Oh yeah, they got the shiniest lures on the end of the fishing rod.
Exactly. I was trying to think of a way to put it. That's perfect. And so I want to protect them from that, and I also am concerned about if they're being taught good science in school. This probably just within the last year, this has become a concern of mine. Listening to Aaron Ra talk about the problems that we have in our school system, and so I often ask them questions about evolution and you know, a little bit of cosmology and stuff. Making sure that they don't say the Earth is 6,000 years old. That's that's going to be like, that's kind of the red flag. If one of them says that, I'll know there's a problem at what's being taught at that school.
Yeah, the alarms start going off.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a part of me that really wants to sit down with my kids and with my wife and really talk about you know, the logic and the reasoning behind I'm trying to think of how to say this, but just talking to him about why I'm an atheist and how truth is important, and that faith is not a mechanism to get to what's true, and
That's right.
that we use evidence, and I really do want to talk to them about these things, but it's at this point it still feels like it's more of a risk than it is worth it. And like I almost said before I started to say it, if I do feel cowardly, taking that position. I see.
That's a good question.
I have some friends on Twitter. You probably have the same one. Some these ex-Muslim people who have,
I know many.
yeah, who've had just the incredible courage and boldness to step away from that faith and take the coverings off their head, and they're not anonymous, and they're right out there, as a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at that and I'm just like, wow, I would love to do that, but I haven't been able to make that step yet.
I could, as long as there's still room, I can add you to one of my chat groups after this. And there's a lot of really encouraging people that I've become friends with. Many of them are in the chat watching us right now, like Faithless Southerner and Nadine, and these guys are there for you as a source of information, as a source of backup. And if you have any questions where you might want to learn how to go about doing something like that, there are many people that have had to go through that I know, that are willing to give you some advice and help out if you're up for that.
That would be cool. Yeah, that would be cool.
All right, not a problem. Also, somebody suggested, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Anthony Magnabosco.
No, I don't think I am.
I would look him up on YouTube. He does a little something called street epistemology.
Okay, I might have seen. Is there a video of Aaron Ra talking to him? The two of them.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. If
they are friends.
If that's the guy, I watched a video where Aaron Ra wanted to have him teach him how to do it.
Yes.
And so, okay. So then I have seen, what's funny about that? So I'm watching this guy do his street epistemology, and it instantly made me uncomfortable, because it reminded me of when I was a teenager and the youth groups would put together these outings where they would want us to walk up to people at the mall or whatever and try to witness to them. And when I was a teenager, doing that was the most uncomfortable thing that I had ever experienced, and would always try to hide in a way so I could avoid doing it. And so when I saw this guy doing this style of atheism as a street epistemology, I was like, oh no, I could never do that. That's almost exactly like, but it was cool. It was an interesting. Yeah, for sure.
Somebody mentioned mentioned in the chat if you had seen Anthony because of something that you said, and I quite agree. #Heathen had said that when he said he discovered that faith isn't an appropriate way to come to truth, that's what reminded them of the Anthony Magnabosco thing, because that's what Anthony often says.
Okay, yeah, I might have picked that up from him. I know that I heard that. That's definitely not something that I would claim as out of my own brain. I know that I had heard that before.
Matt Dillahunty has been known to say that as well.
Yeah,
it's not a reliable pathway.
Yeah, and Matt Dillahunty is somebody that I've spent a ton of time in the past several months watching atheist debates. Yeah, and it's kind of funny, I watched that little Neil Tyson video, and it introduced me to Richard Dawkins, and then it was Lawrence Krauss, and then Christopher Hitchens.
All
I
the
even wrote down.
dominoes start falling.
Yeah, it was a domino effect, and I wrote down a few names. So it went from Hitchens to Michael Shermer, and then Sam Harris,
Yeah.
and then Richard Carrier. It was the first time I'd
Yeah.
ever heard anything about mythicism, about Jesus might not even be real. I don't necessarily side with Richard Carrier on that, but I think it's extremely interesting. And then from watching him, I learned about Robert Price.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was watching a Robert Price and Bart Ehrman debate.
Mm-hmm.
And the host of the debate was Matt Dillahunty.
Yep.
And that was the first time I had ever heard of him. And then I started watching Matt Dillahunty, and he had mentioned Daniel Dennett, which is funny that I missed Daniel Dennett when I was spending all that time listening to Harris and Hitchens. Somehow I missed Daniel Dennett.
Yeah, because and Dawkins, they make the Four Horsemen.
The Four Horsemen, yeah, exactly. And then Dan Barker, are you familiar with him?
Yep.
Okay.
Of course I know Dan Barker. I've got one of his books. Awesome.
And then the most recent person that I stumbled on probably about 4 months ago was Seth Andrews. And I've been really enjoying a lot of his stuff too.
He's great. He's such a easy to listen to guy.
Yeah, for sure. But that's like my deconversion tree right there. There's a bunch of other people that are sprinkled in around those as well that I've listened to and enjoyed. So since that point where I kind of had that epiphany that it's just not reasonable to believe, even if I wanted to, it really wasn't difficult to make that transition. I had already done away with the idea of hell, so there was no fear of that. And since I had been separated or hadn't been going to church for several years, I think I was kind of primed to accept information. And when the information is so solid and backed up and demonstrable, it was pretty easy to make that transition. The only thing that I've struggled with is, being out of the closet about it.
Right. That can take some time. And off the top, I'll tell you right away, you can expect some situations that'll go a lot easier than you thought they might. And you can also expect some situations to probably possibly cause some severances in relationships. It's happened to many people, right? I mean, even Seth Andrews, who you've recently come across, has had to cut off his parents, except for like bigger holidays and stuff. But he doesn't allow them to text him anymore because they constantly preach at him. He's like, look, I'm not into this anymore. So,
yeah.
And there's ups and downs.
What's that? I'm sorry.
There's ups and downs. On top of that, once you're introduced to a lot more of my friends, you'll realize that you do have a foundation of people that'll catch you when you fall. Just so you know.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I get a little bit, just the tiniest bit brave every now and then on Facebook, and I'll throw a quote out there, or from Hitchens or somebody, and I've done that periodically for a little while, maybe 6-8 months or so, and my mother actually came to me one day when she was picking my kids up from our house and said that she was a little bit concerned about my faith and wanted to make sure that I knew that faith in Jesus was the most important thing. And it was coming from these things that I had been posting. And I just bit my lip and kind of nodded. But that's the closest that it's come for the cards to fall. So
Yeah, I think one of two things will happen, dude. Eventually you're going to feel that you have to come out and tell them, or secondly, they're going to eventually catch on.
Yeah, and in a way, I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been some direct questioning, because we haven't gone to church, and they know we haven't gone to church for a long time. And I don't know if they're just kind of lying to themselves.
Which is possible, or in denial.
Yeah, I got a feeling that they think that the church that we were going to ended on a bad note, and we're like, you know, disenfranchised or something, and we don't, and it'll take time. I think that's probably what they've been saying, but it's been, I don't know, almost 6 years since then.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how they could keep telling themselves that, but yeah, I
Well, if they can live their life believing in something that, yeah, at least in my head, is pure nonsense, then
right.
maybe they can fool themselves about this for as long as necessary.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And maybe even they are a little bit relaxed with their, I don't know, enthusiasm. They don't always go themselves. I think it's a very traditional thing for them, like the way they were raised. So they got to keep up that a
They
certain
go, I
level.
guess, on the most important holidays. That's like my parents do for synagogue. Like I was raised Jewish, so
Right.
they're more traditionalists than anything.
Yeah. Well, my parents are a little more than that. They're probably like a, once or twice a month type people.
Okay.
But at the core of belief, they still have a very strong belief uh, in the biblical God, as far as the denomination that they assign to.
Mm-hmm.
But and it would be a big deal if they knew that I didn't believe. Although my dad would probably be more upset if he found out that I wasn't a Republican anymore than he would be if he.
Okay,
That would
that's
probably
funny.
that would probably piss him off even more. But
Dad, I
so
have some news.
yeah.
So, where do you see yourself becoming more of an activist? Like, do you see yourself possibly starting up a YouTube channel?
I've I really love the idea of doing something like that.
Mhm.
But at this point in my life, I'm pretty busy
Right.
with stuff that my kids do, and
You've got
in the
four
band.
of them too,
Yeah,
so
and the
understandable.
right, and a band that I play in,
Me too.
and work, obviously, so to fit that in. But I really do kind of like the idea, but I'd really have to. I feel like I'd have to nail down a specific. Um, I was going to say genre, but that's not the right word. A specific.
Oh, like a niche that you
Yeah,
might
like
want
a
to.
niche. And the problem is I'm really fascinated and interested in biology, and also in astronomy, and also in psychology, and also in history, and all of those seem like a direction that I would want to do something as an atheist activist, and with one of those being, but I just don't feel like I can commit to a certain idea. And so
Sure.
I feel like
You
if I
don't
gave it
have
it
to.
would just be a bunch of nonsense. So
I think you could, if you want to do something where you're able to include all of those, you could do a video type where, in one video you'll talk about biology and how you can demonstrate the difference between what they say in the Bible and what we know in real biology, like, or
right,
evolution or whatever. You could do a video based on that. Well, the Bible says this, but actually blah. And you could do the same thing with psychology, how the brain works, and how, demonstrate some reasons that we get attached to these kind of things. Usually they're emotional attachments. You could talk about your astronomy and the way, how it says everything started in the Bible, but we know it's actually, from what we can infer from the evidence left behind, we know how everything got started, that kind of stuff. You can pick each topic and do a series like that.
Yeah, one of the ones that I feel particularly interested in, and when I was getting my associate's degree, I took a few psychology classes, and
Cool.
there was a portion in during that semester where, and I've been meaning to go back and look at this, and maybe even some of your listeners could even refresh my memory, but there was a little bit of talk about the brain activity with music, and how impressionable it can make your mind. And I even heard a DJ one time describing it was a major band. I think it might have been Pearl Jam or something.
Okay.
And he was describing this live concert, and he said it was like a religious experience. And when I was in the psychology class, they started talking about that. That popped back into my memory, and I immediately attached it to my experiences as a youth in the church with this incredible music that they had, and then how empowered I felt when I was doing it myself years later.
Sure.
It's interesting how the element of music, what it can do to you psychologically, that I think can be great, or it can even be, make you susceptible. Yeah, it can make you susceptible to all sorts of nonsense. So I wouldn't mind nailing that down and really getting some education for myself about that, and understanding what that is, and maybe having a little YouTube channel about that kind of thing. That would be pretty interesting. I think I would enjoy that.
Look into some neuroscience stuff too. That should help.
Yeah. I've been listening to a bunch of stuff from Robert Spolowski. Am I saying that right?
However you pronounce it. I don't know. Okay. I could never pronounce it right either. So
okay, but you know who I'm talking about.
I know who you're talking about. Yes.
Okay, and then also Steven Pinker.
Yeah. Oh, he's great.
Yeah. So yeah,
I just downloaded one of his audiobooks actually.
Yeah, that neuroscience it's fascinating. It's and again, that's my problem is I'm equally fascinated by all these great speakers that I listen to that all come from different backgrounds. You got Richard Dawkins with evolution and biology, to the philosophers like Dennett and Harris, and then the history from Hitchens, and I feel like if I was going to do something as an activist, I would need to try to pick an avenue, and I just don't know how I could ever choose one. But
it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do first, and I had thought of doing street epistemology myself, but
oh really?
I quickly learned that I just don't have the temperament, I think, at least not right now, to be doing that sort of thing. So I figured, what's a good way I could help people, and still, because I like talking to people, and I like getting to know people, especially the people that I'm becoming friends with in our community. So I thought a good way would be to hear how they left their beliefs behind and talk about deconversion, because that also could, eventually help other people that might tune in and see these things. So I thought it'd be a good place to start. And another topic.
It's a really cool format.
Another topic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I think it is too. That's okay. I was just going to say another topic I'll be tackling in the future. Shit, I'm getting all broken up here. You still hear me?
I still got you, but you are bouncing around.
Yeah, again, Okay. Basically, the thing I'll probably do following this at some point, probably about another year or so, is I'm going to get into talking to people that I would consider to be altruistic atheists, like atheists that are doing things for their community, charity,
Right.
stuff like that, because that's sort of another part of who I am too. So that's another avenue. I'll be discussing these sorts of things with other people in the future at some point. So you guys can look forward to that too. Um, so do you have anything that you want to just get out there before we bring this to the close? Because we're actually past an hour, but I lost track of time because I've been enjoying our conversation. So.
Oh, well, cool. I appreciate it. I hoped that I didn't sound like I was just rambling on.
No, that's really good. I mean, a lot of it is, I guess, harder for you to talk about too, right? So kudos to you for getting on here and doing this just because of that.
Yeah, it was, like I told you, it's a cool format. And it's funny, before I even ran into you, actually somebody had sent me a message on Twitter asking me if I had ever been interviewed before, and that's how I came across you. But I had been watching Matt Dillahunty's Atheist Debates, and I noticed several times there would be a caller who would kind of start telling their life story a little bit, and then they kind of get wrangled in because that's not really the topic, And a few times I had thought, that's too bad. I was kind of interested. I would, like to hear where this person.
Oh, you mean
came.
when he's on Atheist Experience?
Yeah, on Atheist Experience, a caller would, kind of start to tell their life story, and since that's not really the point of the show, it would never really. They would never really completely tell their story, and several times I thought I was kind of disappointed. I wanted to hear this person's story, and I had the thought that it would be neat to hear how people have stepped away from their faith, and then when I got a link to you on Twitter and saw what you were doing, I thought, well, there you go, somebody's doing it. That's awesome.
No, I'm not the only one. There are others out there.
Oh, cool.
I've only been doing it, I think, since the summertime. So
yeah, there's almost so much to listen to. I never would have guessed. I mean, I have to. I try to click on YouTube. I'll click the watch later button, and I try to do it with all the different people that I listen to.
So many, man.
Including including your show, and then all that whole tree of reason, I call it. I try to get them in there mixed up, because otherwise I'll end up listening to Atheist Debates for 2 weeks straight, and I I could continue to do that and not listen to anybody else, but I don't want to do that, so
yeah, there's many out there I could recommend to you, tons of them.
Yeah, it's nuts. I just recently started watching a little bit of the non sequitur.
Oh, good Lord!
Yeah, I started watching.
Be prepared to have a bruised forehead, by the way,
right?
From all the fucking
exactly. Oh, and the ones that I picked to watch were flat Earth discussions, and whoa, man, that just
amusing as hell.
That makes you want to put a gun in your mouth. I'm telling you what.
Well, I've had Steve on my show actually, and
have you?
Yeah. He's a good guy. He's different, but he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Overall, but he's deep into the philosophy stuff, right? So him and I.
Yeah, he really likes to talk.
Yeah,
he really likes to talk about the definition of atheist.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And I brought that up, and I was like, dude, so he asked me. He's like, well, what do you consider yourself? I said, I consider myself an atheist. I believe it's all mythology. He goes, oh, so you're like a hard atheist. I go, hard, soft, I don't care. I'm an atheist. I don't believe. That's pretty much all it is for me. Right. He's like, okay, fair enough. I don't think he wanted to get into it with me. But yeah, it was a good time. All right, so basically we'll wrap this up, and we'll go into an after party for a little bit if you're up for it. You don't have to stay long. too.
Yeah, I could probably do about a half an hour or so.
Okay. Well, I'll shut this one down and send you a new link. I'll do it through the email again, so you can click on it. It
Okay.
tends to be easier for people that have just recently started using the Google app, unless it might work through Twitter this time because you've now gone into a Hangout. So
yeah, maybe it will
bypass that whole over to Google Play and whatnot. So, right. Well, thanks, man, for doing this with me. I had a great time.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Yeah, and it was a really interesting story. I really got to tell you, and many people thought so in the chat as well. So
cool.
So you guys that are watching, you guys know the routine. Many of you are in my chat group, which I will add you to, by the way. I'll call you Seek to Reason, even though your name shows up on there. So, but just your first name. And
is it the Adam Fell again?
No, yeah. Well, it just says Adam. That's it.
Oh, okay. Well, you can call me Adam. That's fine.
Okay. So anyway, I'll send you a fresh link, and all you guys that are watching that would like to be involved in the after party, you can look for the link in the group chat. And anyone else that might not be in the group chat that would like to join us, let me know through Twitter. Just send me a message, and I'll send you a link. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in and watching and hanging out with us. It's good to see you guys in the chat there. Thanks for some of your help in answering some of our forgotten stuff and questions and whatnot. And again, Adam, dude, thanks for joining me today, man. I had a really good chat with you.
Thank you.
And you guys know, as I always say at the end of these, remember, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. We'll see you guys next time.